How well do we really know Dr. Ambedkar's life, thought, and legacy? Hi everyone, you're listening to the Southasia Review of Books podcast from Himal Southasian, where we speak to celebrated authors and emerging literary voices from across South Asia. I'm your host, Shwetha Srikanthan, coming to you from Colombo, and my guest today is the scholar and activist Anand Teltumbde, joining us from Mumbai to talk about his new book, Iconoclast, a reflective biography of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. Before we get started, I'd like to invite our listeners to check out Himal's Patreon program on our website, where you can pay to support our mission to give South Asian literature the spotlight it deserves. To make conversations like this possible, we need the support of our listeners like you. As a towering figure of the 20th century, Ambedkar symbolizes a monumental movement towards the annihilation of caste and the emancipation of Dalits. Ambedkar's story becomes the story of this struggle. But like any human being, Ambedkar too had his share of limitations. In India today, Ambedkar's iconization goes beyond the devotion of people. It is being exploited by politicians across the spectrum in a project of ultranationalist myth-making. In his new book, Anand Teltumbde argues that it is important now more than ever to engage with Ambedkar as he defined himself, as an iconoclast, the breaker of icons. Teltumbde's biography educates us about the radical core of Ambedkar's thought and action through the different phases of his social, political, and intellectual trajectory. Cautioning against iconization, he also invites readers to critically dissect the past and to assume agency in understanding our present and future. He writes that Ambedkar's greatness lies in challenging the hegemonic social order, for standing for India's most oppressed people, for fighting the establishment from the belly of the beast, and for changing the course of history of Dalit lives from the eye of the storm, making this legacy one for the people and not the state. Dr. Teltumbde, welcome to the South Asia Review of Books podcast, and thank you so much for joining us to talk about your new book.
Thank you for having me.
Your recent writings have shown how the iconization of Ambedkar and even Bhima Koregaon are co-opted by ruling classes, including the Elgar Parishad case, where several Dalits, intellectuals, and activists continue to be falsely implicated and incarcerated. You were incarcerated under the same case by the state for 31 months. Iconoclast was written during a time in which your freedom was once again in jeopardy. You've mentioned how you never imagined you would write a biography of Ambedkar, and that Ambedkarite's attitude deterred you from undertaking a critical biography. You were also not drawn to the conventional biography that tells the life story of a person. Your objective instead was to tell the story of Ambedkar, the iconoclast, by cautioning against his iconization. Tell us more about this and how the book came to be in this context.
As you rightly said in your introduction, Ambedkar has been iconized beyond the natural limits. Now everybody knows what natural limits are, because certain things are very natural for a society like India to get their great people iconized to some extent. But Ambedkar iconization actually transcended all these limits, and the forces behind that have been the political class and entire system, the way it is organized, the post India is organized. So that is responsible for that. So the many icons happened. Not alone his persona has been iconized, but all the places associated with him also are getting iconized very fast. The Bhima Koregaon that you mentioned is one such. Bhima Koregaon could be taken as an extension of the Ambedkar icon. Many sites besides, like the Diksha Bhumi in Nagpur, where he converted to Buddhism, and Chaitya Bhumi in Mumbai, where he was cremated, also became places of congregation for Dalits and became an icon unto themselves. Not only that, after Modi's coming, he declared something like Panchatirtha. The places where Ambedkar has set foot would be celebrated as Panchatirtha and created five such places. Even abroad, they acquired a house where he stayed as a student at 10 King's Entrance Road. That also is iconized. A big congregation happens even there. So likewise, this has actually exceeded all the limits. Now, there is nothing wrong with the iconization per se, but when the Dalit-like people, get swayed by this kind of trend, it becomes a problematic. So, when I agreed to write a biography, because this was something like a sponsored project by Penguin, as I mentioned in the preface, I had a dilemma, as such as a life story, I would not indulge in writing biographies of people, howsoever great they were. But then I rethought that is that an opportunity for me to really deal with this trend? And then I agreed. And I named it, I qualified it to be something like a reflective biography in my own way, because Ambedkar's picture is drawn with a broad brush, to present his approximate story. I claimed I did contribute certain new facts of his life, etc., but more of an interpretation. And I never claimed that I'm giving something like a new fact. It's not an academic biography that I'm researching into Ambedkar and all. Don't have time like that, because my profession has been different altogether. So my only parallel profession prompted me, and that parallel profession has been an activist. I myself committed to the betterment of the downtrodden, like all strata, and whatever I do, a single word I write is towards that. So this biography also should be taken in that mold, and it need not be compared with any other biographies. I do acknowledge the great work done by many people, but this is what it is. Another point that I wanted to make, and it is given by Ambedkar himself, is that how does one look at great people? Okay, what is the utility of great people? In his speech, Ranade Gandhi and Jina, he says that great people, the way they should relate with disciples, that they should not stifle their creative energies, and disciple also does not have any obligation to great people than saying thank you, because great people provide their shoulders for the next generation to stand on and look further than what they could do. So that is the utility of great people. So we are obligated to get great people. Great people do contribute, and everybody contributes in his own ways. But it does not mean that they were absolutely right, or that is the something like a divine word. So they were also people. They also struggle. But making something like God, packaging them into God and hanging them onto wall, actually becomes a very easy thing to do. And that is what precisely has been happening with Ambedkar. People have made him into God and forgotten about what he said and what he did. It's a double jeopardy. In one sense, that what happens is that you lose sight of the past. You refuse to learn from the past. Ambedkar also might have been faltered, dealing with matters in his strategies and things like. So, to examine that what has gone wrong with that is totally forgotten. Second thing, you actually become a prey for the enemy forces to get manipulated. So both ways Dalits are getting exploited by the political class. Now, when I say latter, that exploitation of Dalits or iconization for that matter of Ambedkar, it has a chronology, how it happened and at what point in time it happened. When India became independent, the Congress party had a monopoly of power. They did not have a really powerful contender, and they undertook certain policy measures, which were in tune with the promises made during the freedom struggle, and namely, significantly, something like land reforms and green revolution. These were the policies employed during first decade. So what happens is that one side, it appeared on paper very well because land reforms was a dire need in India because land was amassed by a few handful of people and that needed to be redistributed. So it all appeared good on paper, but there was a hidden agenda of Congress that it wanted to have an extended hand to rural areas and wanted to create a network of agents from among the populous caste of Shudras. And that way they did the land reforms. One alibi was that the actual tillers, which may have been Dalits, Adivasis, etc., were excluded because their names did not appear in records. And the land's ownership went to the Shudra caste farmers, the traditional Shudra caste farmers, and followed by the Green Revolution brought in huge productivity gains to these people. They became a rich farmer and constituted a class unto themselves. And that worked for some time for the Congress, but with their richness, and it was very significant because all the agricultural income is tax-free in India, and that becomes a very significant income. They diversified into very ancillary kinds of businesses and became a kind of a pseudo bourgeoisie. So that kind of formation. One thing happens in social terms that the baton of Brahminism, which used to be held by the Brahmins or Brahminical caste earlier, went on into the hands of these people. Brahmins were dislodged and were sent to the urban areas. So these kinds of monumental changes that have happened. So in terms of politics, what happens is that for some time it worked, but the political aspirations also alongside grew of this class, which could not be entirely contained by the Congress. And as a result, the electoral politics became competitive. It became increasingly competitive, and you would see that by the end of the 1960 decade, you would find a lot many changes that were happening. Earlier, in social terms, there was a phenomenon of new genre of atrocities on Dalits, and political terms, the emergence of vote banks, because all political parties started viewing people in terms of vote banks defined by their communities, defined by their caste, etc. And Dalit by far became a very, very viable vote bank to be pursued because being economically marginalized people, that vote bank actually worked very cheaply. So, meaning Dalits come very cheap. Somebody, the higher caste politician or people had to be given something like a crore of rupees to buy off. Dalit might be bought off within a few lakhs of rupees. So that kind of cheapness is associated with that. So with that kind of thing, the Ambedkar's icon started gaining importance because already sentimentally people are attached to Ambedkar. They viewed him nostalgically. Oh, he was such a great man. He liberated us from our bondage, and there has not been anybody now around to lead us. That kind of nostalgia remained with Dalit because immediately after Ambedkar, the Dalit politics was totally devastated. The Republican Party initially scheduled caste federation, and despite even Ambedkar's will, these people could not form the Republican Party because of the 1957 election. They wanted the reserve seats and they did not want to forsake reserve seats, etc. So because of that, the formation of Republican Party was delayed, and there arose the vested interest, which actually started disputing about what Ambedkar stood for. So-called quote-unquote Ambedkarism. So initially, Ambedkarism was projected as constitutionalism, and the other part, which happened to be knowing Ambedkar better and wanted to actually take up some material questions like land, were castigated as something like non-Ambedkarites or playing into hands of communists. So this episode again repeats when Dalit Panthers was formed in 1970s as a reaction to the devastation of Republican Party. But there also again the question of Ambedkarism came in, and this time the Ambedkarism became Buddhism. It was contended that Ambedkar gave us Buddhism, and that is what Ambedkar wanted us to follow. The counter was again that the opposite camp was actually following communists, not Ambedkar, and they split. So this went on happening, So this train now needed to be arrested. Now, when it comes to the BJP government coming to power in 2014, this trend actually has been taken to a new height. BJP has been an antithetical party. Okay, the entire Sangh Parivar has been 180 degrees opposite to what Ambedkar stood for, but they want started co-opting. Now, this co-optation in Sangh Parivar began in somewhere 1980s. Initial Sar Sanghachalaks like the founder Hedgewar and Golwalkar were not very concerned with that, and they always denigrated Ambedkar. So they did not, they ignored Ambedkar, and they themselves were ignorable anyway. But Devras had become a third Sir Singh. He had a strategic mind. He might be the lowest profiled the chief of the RSS, but he had a strategic mind and he realized that this would not work. RSS would not have a future unless it infiltrates into Bahujans. And then he started co-optation process with which Ambedkar was included in their pantheons like Pratha Smaraniya, and they very forcefully started driving this samajik samarasta, that means social harmony. So with that, they started producing books that how Ambedkar was a great benefactor of Hindu. Even the Ambedkar's conversion also was taken as a benefaction, in a sense that he did not want to go for something like Abrahamic religions, and he accepted Indians and wanted to preserve the Indian culture, and so on and so forth. How Ambedkar was friendly with the RSS ideologues and all those. So basically, there were certain things because Ambedkar said so many things at various times and not necessarily consistently. Rather, when he was questioned about the consistency, Ambedkar dismissed it, saying that consistency is a virtue of an ass and I'm not one. so so that kind of thing came handy for these people to pick up for a distortion. And in that distortion, they blended certain absolute fabrications, absolute lies that Ambedkar visited such and such camp, and then Ambedkar was very happy with the RSS thing. All those kinds of amalgam they used for sapronizing Ambedkar. And with hindsight, we can see from 80s on, they have almost succeeded because, India has the first past the post kind of election system wherein the winner takes it all. So there is nothing like minimum that is set for winning the representation. So these vote bank politics also stems from this kind of system. So what happens is that they have been making good inroads in Dalit. Initially, they sort of minor Dalit caste. Dalits could be divided broadly into Ambedkarite Dalits who followed Ambedkar. That means something like most populous caste among Dalits becomes by default Ambedkarite Dalits, and non-populous caste. There are so many castes who are the minor numbers. They constitute and with a significant chunk, however. So RSS made inroads firstly, co-opted those kind of non-Ambedkarite Dalits and started making inroads into Ambedkarite camps too. So this way, they have succeeded quite a lot. In 14 election and 19 election showed find that BJP gained more number of reserved seats than all the parties put together. So in 24, probably this number 24 election, which dented BJP's numbers. So in 24, probably this number came down from 76 to 66 or something, and their vote share also dipped by 10%. So that, however, but still they command more number of seats than any other party. Then this is an evidence enough that they have made significant inroads among Dalits. On the other hand, where the people who have been speaking for real issues of Dalits, like material issues of Dalits, or something like atrocities on Dalits, etc., during this period of time, it is significant to note that the Dalit atrocities if they are a proxy for something like a state of Dalit, then they have been rising like anything. Today the figure hovers more than 52,000 a year. Never before it had reached that kind of high. So these are the kinds of things which actually ought to prompt anybody to worry about the trend. And everything revolved around Ambedkar. This unique phenomena that something like one icon around which 220 million people could be twirled. It's an unprecedented in history. So it should have attracted attention of many other people to sort of look into this and do something about it. Now, I perceived when this project was proposed, I perceived an opportunity because I have not unnecessarily written anything because I do not have time. I have been professionally very different. So I did not have time, but because of my activism, etc., I saw an opportunity to present Ambedkar as a real person, okay, person in flesh and bone. People could see or people could relate with. He doesn't become a god or a portrait to be hung on a wall, but people, the younger generation at least should see that he was as good or as bad a person like themselves, and he could achieve certain things in his life with the hard work that he put in. We could also do that. So that is the first of the inspiration that they should derive. And second thing, they should actually look into his life as to whether all that thing that he's done has been right, or what has been the aftermath of all that to this. And that's why actually normally biographies end with a man's death, but my biography extends, and my last chapter, as you might note, is that legend lives on. That somebody said also that a dead Ambedkar is more powerful than the live one. So like that, Ambedkar's influence actually extends far more than during his lifetime. So people should trust with that last chapter. Actually, I give an account of sort that what is the state of Dalit, and nothing appears to have changed. Actually, in certain terms, the things have got worse.
In a recent piece for Himal, Harish Vankade explored the question of who gets to write about Ambedkar and how these writings often fail to reflect an essential part of what Ambedkar means today and of his afterlife in the India that he helped to create. Similarly, your book looks at how the mythology becomes so overpowering that it makes any attempt to see the real Ambedkar an impossible task. Even some scholarly efforts that are seemingly objective also contribute to this image. Any critique of Ambedkar is seen as blasphemy, but you write that if history demands it, no risk is too large to take. Tell us about how you've tackled this risk and how has the biography been received by scholars?
It has been a truth that once somebody gets deified, critiquing him becomes a blasphemy. It's a corollary. So in Ambedkar's case, it is much so because the followers are very gullible and they're ignorant. They do not read anything. They're actually reared on something like a folklores and what happened. And these days now with the WhatsApp University, it become very, very handy. That much literacy is there to handle or fiddle with the telephones, and all kind of trash that spreads on WhatsApp becomes a feed for them. So it becomes very risky enterprise to undertake the kind of things that I do, because there would be shower of abuses and this and that, etc. I expected much more, but it has not happened to that extent. At least I'm not aware of, because people would tell me otherwise. But book has received lots of encomiums, something like a dozen reviews I have seen myself, and excepting for a couple of them which have tangentially critiqued the book, and that also I take very positively. Most of them have been very euphoric about it, and but that was not my intention to get good reviews or anything, as I already prefaced. So my intentions have been something like It should breach that trend that has been set in. So that had been my intention. So I get a feel that it is making some impact in that direction. There are a lot of people who meet me when I go lecturing here and there, and they come to meet me also to my place, and they voice that, oh yeah, this is the new direction and the entirely new perspective that is being given, and thank you for that, and all kinds of things. I think because no single book, or I couldn't be that fool to expect that a single book would make a change or something like that. I have written almost 3 dozen books, and each has been working in its own way. They must have contributed in clarifying certain things, and the social change comes in very subtle manner, So it is not that nothing bigger than that can be expected.
It was fascinating to learn that so many photographs of Ambedkar were collected and published by you in 1998 on a CD-ROM, the e-compendium on Babasaheb Ambedkar, and about 200 of these are included in the book as well. Ambedkar's studies also received a boost in the 1990s when a substantial amount of his writings and speeches had become available to the public. Again, you've made a significant contribution in digitizing and making them accessible to scholars. Tell us more about your archival efforts over the years and how this contributed to the labor of bringing this biography on Ambedkar to life.
In 1998, I created a e-compendium, which was basically a work of Ambedkar. All the volumes that were published by Maharashtra government that were digitized, scanned, and OCR'd. And my intention was to make them available because they were very ill edited and ill indexed kind of volumes. The Maharashtra government did a good job at least bringing Ambedkar's writing in public domain, but they have not done a perfect job. They could have been well indexed, etc., so that people could use it effectively. So that was not done. So what I wanted to contribute in is to sort of make them accessible. And I faced myself a huge problem in dealing with these volumes. So what I did for myself was that devise a search engine, and sort of it became quite handy to search across the volumes with some keywords, and it threw up something like a passages. So that kind of thing I wanted to make available for the public and digitized in 98 when technologies for scanning as well as OCRing were not very advanced. When I was heading myself IT division, information technology division of my company, and had an access to lots of trains that were happening, etc. Lots of tools that were available. So all those kinds of things I made use of and created that e-compendium. E-compendium happened because when it happened that when we finished digitizing and embedding the search engine into thing, then I thought that, well, not everybody probably knows. In 98, not everybody knew Ambedkar. So maybe that if we include his photographs, whatever they were available, and even something like his voice, audio clip, a video clip, just to give a feel to the people who have not yet got to see him. So all those kinds of things. Then I named it e-compendium and sort of published it, and expectedly it really became quite useful to researchers. So many people complimented those days, sending me emails. More than I might have got more than 100 emails complimenting and thanking me for that work. Then when we, in course of time, then we launched a website, meaning some other people, the youngsters in US who were recently employed, they grouped together and they formed the group. And I had a close friend who coordinated with them. So with that kind of thing, we launched a website called ambedkar.org, and we ported all these materials onto that. So it became universally valid. Initially, it was provided on the CD-ROM, but CD-ROM has a materiality aspect, so it had a limitation on that one. But when it became virtual and available on website, so it became quite handy for people. So this proposal of writing a Ambedkar's book, and Penguin's idea was something like an illustrative biography of Ambedkar, etc. So, in accepting it, I thought that if this material is already there, so probably I will not have to expend much energy, and I could use that. But in course of time, two ways it dissuaded me, because firstly, then I started regretting it, because why should I write a biography? And second thing is that in practical terms, when I started looking at my material, so many photographs, etc., were not of a good quality, and even my digitized material was not accurate. We did not have manpower to sort of proofread. So, both ways, then I thought that this is not the way I should do the book. Probably I should send a regret to Penguin, and I would not do it. Then the idea came to my mind that okay, the book could be shaped like this. That this is an opportunity, as I said before. And then I started writing in that way. And then the importance of pictures did not overweigh anyway. But then again, we thought, okay, all many people would perceive still it is biography. So let people, pictures also be there. And two people helped me in that. One is Sudarak Olve. He is my friend and who has been a celebrated photographer who documented the Dalit lives, etc. And he had a collection of Ambedkar. So he basically reworked the photographs of Ambedkar, etc. and made into high density format. And another one is Vijay Survade, who is a legendary collector of Ambedkar material. So many people bank on him for photographs, etc. So these two people very, very affectionately lent their collection to me, and then I used those photographs. So photographs are not important in that book. So, so basically, my idea was different.
Getting into the content of the book, in 1927, Dalits were beaten for exercising their legal civil rights at Mahad in a revolt to secure access to public drinking water, which in practice was denied to untouchables. When hundreds of Dalits were ready to fight back then against the rioting and bloodshed inflicted by dominant caste Hindus, Ambedkar asked them to maintain peace. You argue that if Dalits had retaliated against the attack at Mahad, the history of the Dalit movement could have taken a different turn. Tell us more about this, and how did this experience lead Ambedkar to rethink the possibility of internal reform in Hindu society and look towards the political sphere?
This was in my book on Mahad that I gave my reflections that if Dalits had retaliated the attack of the Hindu guns, the turn the history of Dalit movement would have taken a different turn. And I stand by it. Many people were disturbed by this kind of approach, but I stand by it because I was always surprised that such a mass of people, they are not very few, and such a mass of people have been enduring humiliation and oppression every day for so many hundreds of years. How could it happen? Even Ambedkar was disturbed. In 1936, he said in the wake of his declaration that he would renounce Hinduism. That time he said that Dalit lack three strengths. One is the strength of numbers, strength of another one is strength of finance, and third was spirituality. Because this kind of subservience or insults and humiliation was internalized so much that they actually lost spirit. So everybody, caste system actually survived because of that. That everybody internalized that things have to be like that only. So there is no way out. So we have to live like that. So if anybody had question in the process, things would not have been the same. So extending the same logic I thought that Mahad offered an opportunity because probably never before that so many people collectively gathered together and they were of a different kind. Something like the documentation shows that about the first conference that happened in Mahad had 3,000 delegates who were the veterans of World War One. So when these people actually mounted an attack on Dalits, stray Dalits in market, and then they approached the venue of conference and spoiled their food while they were eating and still beaten them. So that time, these people were very enraged and just wanted the nod from Ambedkar to retaliate. So it need not be like Ambedkar. I'm not concerned with whether Ambedkar nodding the thing or not. But if these people had retaliated at that time, the entire thing would have been a different. Future things would have been different because a caste Hindu, something like a Brahmin, would for him the stake is very high. If a lower caste man raises hand on him, okay, until that he was something like a slave for him. The upper caste could do anything, and these people will take lying low. But if he retaliates, that means if he reacts and something like avenges his insult, that would be too much for them to take. It's a very big shock, and this it would have created a shock wave, which would have traveled across the country, and something like symbolizing that no, these people are not going to take it anymore. So that would have taken a very, very different thing. It's a cultural thing. A culture can be only changed with the shock waves. Unless it is jolted, the culture does not change. Culture does not change gradually or something like that. The jolts are required, and this could have been given this thing. In terms of number or feasibility of it, it was very clear that there were only some few hundred people left in Mahad, upper caste Mahad, and a dozen fellows. The attackers would not be more than that. But with taking entire population also, these people were 3,000 against few hundreds. So they would have really beaten them, and that would have created shockwave. The meaning the reasons proffered, against such kind of thing is like if they had retaliated, the innocent people in villages, etc., would have been beaten, and much more oppression would have happened to them, and all those kinds of things. I do not buy that logic because things do not happen that way. Dalits were either beaten because when these people did not retaliate, then also people in several villages were beaten for defying the caste code. Oh, how dare you sort of pollute or chodar tank? That was the dictum. So either way, people were beaten. So, but if these people had taken an initiative to retaliate that, it would have taken a different turn. Rather, those attacks would not have happened. People, the innocent people who did not have anything to do with Mahad, also were beaten. People would have thought twice. Oh, this is not done here or not. It comes to my mind, in something like 20, 30 years before Ambedkar did all these kinds of things, Ayyankali in Kerala did such a thing. He was I think among all the leaders, he stands as a real representative of Dalit, an illiterate man, a sturdy man, depending on just his bodily strength, and he sort of reacts to the caste discrimination that Pulayars in Kerala were not allowed to walk on certain roads, and this man actually takes his thing in a very upper caste style and rides his bullock cart, and the riots happen. He again leads his community, and bigger riots happen, and he retaliates them. And thereafter, there is nothing like all those roads get open to the people. So these are the things by which the cultures actually could be breached. So not a very parliamentary way or something like that. And in that sense, I still insist, although it is a hindsight, but I still insist that such an approach would have worked much better.
In the Indian constitution, a mirror image of scheduled caste was created for extending the reservation to backward classes and scheduled tribes. Under the VP Singh government in 1990, this triggered the casteization process on a larger scale. You argued that reservation could have become an instrument to move towards the annihilation of caste, and while seemingly progressive, the policy became a political weapon to preserve caste inequality. You write that one of Ambedkar's biggest accomplishments would turn into one of the biggest problems of Indian history. Tell us about the dysfunctionality of the reservations that Ambedkar fought for and won.
Now, when reservation is spoken about, reservations are of two types. Ambedkar basically fought for the political representation, that reservation in the legislatures, etc. So that anyway, and the other one, let me say, the other one is the reservation in educational sphere and public employment sphere. So we can broadly distinguish between these two. The former has been total catastrophe in sense that those days, this mold was cast by the colonial rulers. They actually drove entire thing in a certain manner, and people actually started fighting for a quotas and share of a political power. Firstly, they sort of seeded religious division, and thereafter something like the reservations. The Muslims were given separate electorates and reservations in 1909, Monumental reforms, and so on and so forth. Thereafter, the entire political direction channel was cast. So Ambedkar also fell in a line and started creating a political identity of Dalits and demanding separate electorates, separate reservation, etc. He even won in a roundtable conference a separate electorate for Dalits against Gandhi's opposition. But then Gandhi pressured him with his past and to death, and the Pune Pact was enacted. Okay, so separate electorates went away, and the joint electorates and reservation seats. The reservation seats were rather more than doubled. So all those things have happened. Now, what is the premise behind this? Premise behind this was the Dalits should have a voice in political power. How do you get the voice in political power? So having say in a legislature, when the laws are formulated or policies are formulated, you have a voice in that. Can the representation of Dalits have a voice this way, that if they sit in legislature? Answer is not necessarily. So Dalit became now, this is the reservation which actually is 100% implemented right from the elections have been taking place till now. In Constitution, they agreed to limit it for 10 years. The assumption was that within 10 years, these people would be on par with the rest of the community. It was a nonsensical assumption, firstly, and there was no wherewithal that it would be brought like that. So, what happens is now joint electorate and the reservation with which the entire quota is fulfilled religiously. The history shows that all these people, all these worthies who actually reach parliament and assemblies have not spoken a word in history for the Dalit cause. They becomes an inert supporter of the ruling class parties. So this has been a plain kind of statement. So why it happens like that? Because in giant electorate, they are basically sponsored by the ruling class parties. The tickets are given by the ruling class parties and are voted for by the general population, which anyway exceeds the Dalit population. Okay, so they are more dependent on the non-Dalit communities than the Dalits. So they cannot structurally voice for Dalits so vehemently against this thing. Lest they lose their all frills, frills of being in a power corridors. So this has been happening. Now we'll take another question. So people, the Dalits, in a very stereotype manner, have been castigating Pune Pact, that they said because separate electorates have gone and joint electorates have come, and because of that, this system has created the Dalit stooges. As Kashiram put it, the Bahujan Samaj Party has taken this issue in a big way, and they had actually built up a movement against Pune Pact to annul the Pune Pact and have a separate electorates, etc. My contention is that even separate electorates would not have worked, because even the ruling class parties, it was not impossible for them to intrude the Dalit constituencies through separate electorates, create their own Dalit stooges and pitch them against the genuine, so-called genuine Dalits. It would not have worked. So both ways it would not have worked. The key lies in something like or flaw lies in the first past the post kind of election system, which actually creates lot of avenues for people to sort of manipulate the people choices. The alternative was proportional representation system. I touch upon this in the book. Proportional representation system, very theoretically and very basically, actually guarantees representation to each and every citizen of the country. Okay, now there are models and how to enact it and how to do that, etc. But and that is probably the merit of proportional representation system, because it is available for customization. If we are living in a technological era, probably that also could be used to customize this election system. But there has not been a discussion in the Constituent Assembly on proportional representation system, and by default, actually, they adopted this Westminster model and Westminster system in toto. As a matter of fact, the entire thing, there has not been any change after independence. When transfer of power took place, the new people, I do not know what that independence means, because new people adopted everything that continued, and there has been a seamless continuation of things. They adopted something like same state structure, same processes, same people, same everything, okay, same IPC and all those kinds of things. And even constitution, two-thirds of the constitution has been the same as the last constitution, colonial constitution, Government of India Act 1935. So what has changed? Nothing has changed, because colonial states dictum was to sort of their intention was to exploit India and control people, keep people at bay and smoothen the exploitation process. So that was their objective. If everything had remained the same, the intention by default also could be the same of the new ruling classes. So this is what happened. So as regard to political reservation, I don't think, unless the election system had been changed, proper election system had been adopted, there was no solution either through separate electorate or joint electorate. My study at least does not support it. The advantage of proportional representation system would have been, and it was spoken out in Constituent Assembly by people like Rajkumari Amrita Kaur. So she said that with the proportional representation system, even any institutional device of reservation, etc., would be obviated. And yes, it is true, because automatically the manner in which people collected or organized, they would have got their due share either way in proportional representation system, which is impossible in the FPTP system. Well, with this, we will turn to the second one, the reservations in educational and public employment sphere. In that, what happens is the first of the reservations have come from, were instituted during colonial times. It is tacitly done because it is not so much explicit in the act, but it was recognized that these untouchables, depressed classes or whatever they were called then, were an exceptional people. There is no dispute about there being a separate class which actually were totally segregated from mainstream society and dilapidated and downtrodden and so on and so forth. So there was no question about their exceptionality. Not a single person could raise hand. So a reservation is an exceptional policy. because when you declare that all are equal, then you are making some exception. So the reservation policy becomes an exceptional policy for exceptional people, and then there should be a automatically terminating clause over which that exceptionality or conditions of exceptionality would vanish. So these three are the vital kinds of prerequisites for any policy. When you formulate a policy, these things should be taken care. That you should not make a reservation something like a casual tool to be applied to everything. That should be very restricted to a set of people which have objectivity about their exceptionality, and you would like that condition to vanish. Because of that, you are actually creating a policy. So this way it should have been done. In colonial time, reservation only was given for untouchables as an exceptional people. Even tribals also were recognized as exceptional people, but then they made different kinds of arrangement for them. So, well, when you became independent, that time the avenues were open that to extend formally the reservation for even the tribes. So, what could have been done is that they also could be merged together and created a separate schedule. The internal division, etc., could also be in operation. These are the minor matters, how to operationalize things, etc., could be tackled. But what they have done is the entire paradigm was changed. That exceptionality vanished, and they started sort of hampering upon backwardness. Now, India is a universally backward country. So, in a backward country, how do you define backwardness? So, they extended these reservations to backward classes, which were not defined, were such a vague kind of conception. Even the people speak out in a constituent assembly, but it was not considered, and the reservation was extended to them. So, basic intention, it appears that they did not want, the ruling classes did not want to forego these two very very potent kind of weapons in their hands, and which had proved themselves during colonial times. One, religion; second, caste. And some way they wanted to preserve this. Why I say so is that if they wanted even to extend reservation to the scheduled caste, it could have been very well done, because the schedules were created already in 1936, and that snapped the relations with the Hindu caste. So if the intention was to extend just a social justice to scheduled caste, which were the deserving class, so the caste also could have been abolished. Abolish the caste, outlawed the untouchability. If you go to history and look at minutely all upper caste reformers, and the Gandhi is the best example, they actually hanged upon untouchability as an evil of the Hindus, and they wanted that to be abolished, not caste. Some way, directly, indirectly, they justified caste. That is a good this thing. Today, even RSS also doing the same thing. There is a track, there is a historical trend which actually has been saying so. And what Constituent Assembly does is the same. They only abolish untouchability. How could untouchability go if the caste remain? And caste, nobody speaks about caste in Constituent Assembly, because they are all quiet on this thing, because it's a holy cow. So they did not want to touch it. Not even scheduled caste people actually keep quiet, because they might be apprehending that if the caste is abolished, our reservations would go. But that was not the thing. Reservations remained intact on the basis of the schedule, which was an administrative schedule, not a Hindu caste, not a scriptural caste. So this way, they preserved caste, and extending the reservation to backward classes actually paved the way for casteization of society, which is the palpable reality that we suffer today. Now, as regards how this entire policy instrument could have been a tool for annihilation of caste, also needs to be seen. It should be seen in this way, that instead of backwardness, which actually is spoken repeatedly in the Constituent Assembly, it is not the backwardness of people for which the reservations were required. Dalits required reservation not because they were backward or there were something like genetically deficient in them. They required because the larger society had a deficiency, disability, that they could not treat its own people equal. And that is the disease. That disease needed to go. That an exceptionality condition actually relates with this. And in order to annihilate caste, the larger entity, which is a larger society, only could undertake it, not a Dalit. So, what happens in the present kind of system with disability or the deficiency associated, it becomes stigma on Dalit. Anybody, any reserved, any Dalit actually getting into a reserve post or getting into an educational institution with reservation, etc., has an inferiority complex or something like a stigma to carry, for lifelong. So, in the if the policy had been properly premised and designed, this stigma would not have been there. The stigma would have been with the society. Society would have felt bad. Oh, we have been wrong in treating these people badly, and we need to correct ourselves. So that was a viable way of doing things. But no, the entire thing was actually stood upside down. So many things would be spoken about, like even Dalits, would not have developed a vested interest in continuing that, because restricting their quota to their share of population is their loss rather. Why should I be confined to something like a socketed thing, space? Entire opportunity sphere should be available to me too. The Dalit also would have eyed like that, and they would have also done that. The obligation stayed on state to educate the society and undertake a campaign like that. This is what it is, and the society could have been sensitized to do away with these kinds of caste-based discriminations.
Buddhism imparted a new identity to Dalits. Ambedkar said that no one can achieve emancipation in Hinduism, that it was possible only through Buddhism. But while Buddhism did not discriminate between castes, it was not caste agnostic or abolitionist. The caste system is still prevalent today in Buddhist societies in Sri Lanka, Nepal, Myanmar, and beyond. As institutionalized religions, it's also weaponized in these countries by the state and ruling classes. Why is it that Ambedkar saw religious conversion as the solution, and why did he choose Buddhism?
Ambedkar's solution of conversion to Buddhism as a means to annihilate caste stemmed from his fundamental understanding of caste in a sacral mode. He viewed caste as an integral part of a unified Hindu religious order, hierarchically structured according to the Varna system. Now, one could argue that this perspective was influenced, at least in part, by the colonial tendency to categorize Indian society through newly defined religious divisions, a strategy that facilitated the policy of divide and rule. In annihilation of caste, because British wanted a neat division, like they grouped together an Hindu and then created a Muslim, a counterbalancing kind of communities, and everything was fitted into that. This was a colonial schema, and many people fell prey. So Ambedkar also actually visualized caste to be rooted in Hindu scriptures. In Annihilation of Caste, his magnum opus of sorts, he explains everything and actually comes to the conclusion. Castes are rooted in Hindu Dharma Shastras, and in order to annihilate them, the Hindu Shastras would have to be dynamited, meaning destroyed in a subtle way. Then he praises Upanishads, etc. Then divides Hindu scriptures into two parts, etc. That is a different part. But he actually problematizes the Hindu Dharma Shastras being the source of the caste. And he sees that Hindus will never be ready to destroy their dharmashastras. Nobody will, rather. And that's why he says, okay, I will bid goodbye. And as for me, I'm getting out, and I wish you very well. This is the way annihilation caste end. Now, the critical question to be seen is, are castes truly sacral? While Hinduism and its scriptures may have sanctioned caste, that does not necessarily mean caste was born from them or that it continues to derive its power from them. Caste as an operational system function more likely in a sectarian or associational mode rather than purely as a religious construct. You see, in a villages, take a typical village and a backward caste who is relatively an upper caste to Dalits. Actually, the way they behave, and there are several castes. So, do they know really that some of, meaning some Hindu Dharma Shastra actually says so, and that's why I am actually supposed to be behaving like this? No, caste acquired their autonomous existence by living like for several years, and they actually become a sectarian kind of groups. So that is the practical mode in which the caste lives. And neither way, theoretically speaking, no stroke of pain, some dharma shastra or anything can create a social system. Social system come into being, and the ruling classes actually design or construct their scriptures around to justify it. So this has been a established mechanism. So you cannot attribute something like to the written text that a social system was given a birth, you know. So you cannot say that. There could be an associational mode also with which the caste can be there, like sectarian mode. Caste operates as a collection of independent religious communities, each with its own doctrines and practices, self-contained and defining its own rights and duties independently of broader Hindu religious principles. Okay, there is something like an umbrella paradigm created by Hindu so-called that itself is vague. And underneath, the way the castes operate have their own rules and regulations. Each caste has its own rules and regulations, the ritualistic modes and all those kinds of things. They are not uniform across. So they basically are a sectarian kinds of groups. And others are associational caste which does not have even anything like, like non-Hindu people, like Muslims and Parsis and all. Because humans always are social people, they are, as an individual, they are very incapable of surviving. So they group together. So such kind of collectivities are natural. But what is the nature of that collectivity needs to be probed. So Hindu caste system or the way the caste lived are basically or more of sectarian groups than the sacral groups. Okay, so the fundamental flaw remains like that in the diagnosis that what are castes. This flaw then misleads one to see everything in a religious mode. So Babasaheb also sort of got swayed and started sort of thinking solution in terms of conversion of religion. Now, the way he looks at it, he actually looks at it from material point of view. Sometimes he goes very spiritual. So it is very difficult to understand him, because when he first time declared that he would renounce Hinduism in Yevle in Maharashtra in 1935, it created a big stir among the Dalits itself. Many people were disturbed, and he had to organize a big conference in 1936 to explain himself. So many time it appeared, in between he had been giving a statement like, if you want to convert, then become Musalman. And many people, in my area in Vidarbha, some 20 odd people had become Musalman in deference to his call. So in 1936 also in that thing, many Dalit youths actually came with a skull cap, expecting that now we have to become a Muslim. But the speech he delivers there, it is of a different tone. Then he actually recounts what are the strengths, why the religious conversion is necessary. So he recounts and not bases everything on a material terms. Like Dalits have three weaknesses, as I said earlier: numbers, finance, and spirituality. And the solution lies in merging with some existing religious community so as to gain the strengths. So this is the formulation for conversion. When he practically or converts himself to Buddhism after 20 years of study, his logic is entirely different. He then brings in that how Buddhism is scientific, how Buddhism is rational, and Buddha's legacy is legacy against caste, and so on and so forth. Well, so this has been the thing. Now, how does religion impinge upon caste? Did Buddhism do anything with caste? It's a different matter that Buddhist society, now no Buddhist society is perfect. It's different talking about Buddha's principles. Buddhism in that sense might be very a good system of thought, a very rational, scientific system of thought. You can respect it. But when it becomes institutionalized, or anything becomes institutionalized, it lives in a different mode. So Buddhism also, as an institutionalized religion, has all the negatives of any other thing. It is as good a religion or as any other. So all the societies, Buddhist society, like you enumerated, do have some kind of caste-like divisions. Coming back to India, after conversion to Buddhism, what has happened to Dalits? Rather, today we find that Indian society is more casteized than ever before. That has been my font sentence I have been repeating ad infinitum. And that is rooted in the reservation. But apart from that, even, what has the conversion to Buddhism done? I do not see any dent, excepting for a notional identity that we received. Nothing has been done. So there has been a cultural kind of change to some extent, but that cultural change also acts in both ways, because that becomes a cultural assertion of the beliefs which are actually taken as an affront by the upper class in vicinity. And if something goes wrong, then it precipitates into atrocity. So it has been happening both ways. So as regards annihilation of caste, conversion has not proved to be a tool.
You write that Ambedkar once stated that conversion to Islam or Christianity will denationalize the depressed classes. If they go to Islam, the number of Muslims will be doubled and the danger of Muslim domination also becomes real. End quote. You flag how the combination of his dislike of communism and Islamophobia could match that of the Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS. The comments are misappropriated by the RSS, which considers Muslims, Christians, and communists to be the outsiders and enemies. For example, the BJP tried exploiting Ambedkar's book on Pakistan to project him as anti-Muslim. It conveniently ignores the fact that Ambedkar supported the Muslim League's demand for Pakistan and also denounced its vision of making India into a Hindu Rashtra. Ambedkar warned that if Hindu Raj does become a fact, it will no doubt be the greatest calamity for this country. What can we take away from his conflicting views in an India today where anti-Muslim rhetoric is at an all-time high and Muslims are one of the primary targets of hate and violence?
Ambedkar's views or contradiction with communism again had multiple strands. Okay, firstly, his intellectual grooming took place in a predominantly non or anti communist academic milieu. He was deeply influenced by John Dewey, to his pragmatism during his time in the US and later by Fabianism in London. Both these thought systems were in many ways at odds with Marxism and communism. The second strand relates to his early political career in Bombay, where he began organizing Dalits and found himself sharing constituency with the communists. The communists, for their part, were often doctrinaire and failed to appreciate the salience of caste and the need for a conscious struggle against it. This ideological divergence only widened over time rather than being bridged. Thirdly, Ambedkar was not philosophically convinced by the materialist foundation of communism or a theory of history. His personal and intellectual upbringing had instilled in him a deep regard for spiritual values, which made it difficult for him to accept a wholly materialist view of history and society. Fourthly, in one of his final speeches at Kathmandu, he reflected on the goals of both Buddha and Marx, arguing that while their aims were similar, their methods were fundamentally different. Marx, he said, relied on dictatorship of proletariat and violence. Okay, revolution itself sounded like violence to him. And dictatorship of proletariat was a dictatorship simply. Whereas he contended the Buddha promised transformation without either violence or dictatorship. He thus convinced himself that the method of Buddha was morally and politically superior to that of Marx. As for his views on Muslims, the RSS and BJP have made a concerted effort to distort them, often cherry-picking from his book Pakistan or the Partition of India. At certain moments, he does appear to reflect prevailing social stereotypes that are unfavorable to Muslims. However, any honest and comprehensive reading of his work reveals that he was not anti-Muslim. One powerful quote suffices to refute the Sangh Parivar's propaganda. And that quote is, he said one, Hindu society is a myth. I have no hesitation in saying that if the Mohammedan has been cruel, the Hindu has been mean. And meanness is worse than cruelty. Another of his statements is even more forceful and especially relevant today as the Sangha Parivar drives its juggernaut towards a Hindu Rashtra. He says, if Hindu Raj does become a fact, it will no doubt be the greatest calamity for this country. As you said, no matter what the Hindus say, Hinduism is a menace to liberty, equality, and fraternity. It is incompatible with democracy. Hindu Raj must be prevented at any cost. So that should settle about his opinions vis-a-vis Muslims, communists, and all that. Because RSS, formulated at the stage of birth itself, Savarkar, who is the progenitor of Hindutva, concept of Hindutva, actually makes two Christians and Christians and Muslims as the enemy duo, internal enemies of Hindus. And Golwalkar adds one more to that as a communist. So this way, RSS in colonial times did not see the colonialists or imperialists as an enemy, but these people as an enemy. And they have been driving it systematically. And that has been, they have been very consistent in sort of targeting these people all through.
Let's also briefly touch on Ambedkar's views on Adivasis. You've raised the point on how Ambedkar's exclusive focus on untouchables was somewhat problematic for its narrowness, ignoring other instances of injustice. His language was sometimes colored with prejudice against Adivasis. He had referred to them in terms such as savages in need of civilizing and even warned Hindus that the aborigines are a source of potential danger. You also flagged that Ambedkar echoed the very language he had objected to in Gandhi regarding untouchables. Tell us more about this.
See, Ambedkar was contending with many forces during his lifetime. So, in the realm of political contention, Ambedkar at times appears excessively focused on Dalits. And he actually many times said that even the liberation of Dalits is a problem heavy enough for my slender shoulders. So, that kind of statements, he almost kind of internalized that is what is his life goal, and he did not relate as much with other things. But that does not mean that he was against something in a sectarian way. He was against some group of people or which were equally oppressed. So, with regard to Adivasis, he described them as backward and living in a primitive state, arguing that they had not yet developed a consciousness of rights as Dalits had. This view carried a paternalistic tone, resembling in some ways the manner in which Gandhi and others spoke about Dalits earlier. So Ambedkar also sounds like that. Oh, these people are living in jungles and they did not organize, they are illiterate, they do not have kind of consciousness which is required for political power and so on and so forth. Unlike Dalits, who had been deeply embedded within the Hindu caste system, Adivasis historically lived outside the dominant caste hierarchy, often in geographically isolated regions. Ambedkar believed that Dalits had already forged a political identity and movement, such as through the Scheduled Caste Federation, whereas the Adivasis had not yet developed a similar organized consciousness. However, his position was not about denying Adivasi rights, but rather reflected a belief that their struggle required a different strategic approach. Despite this apparent divergence, Ambedkar's constitutional and legal interventions were firmly supportive of Adivasi rights. As chairman of the drafting committee, he played a key role in securing the fifth and sixth schedule of the constitution, ensuring autonomy in governance for Adivasi areas, protection from land alienation by non-tribals, and recognition of customary laws. These were far reaching provisions that even many prominent nationalist leaders hesitated to endorse. Ambedkar also firmly opposed the characterization of Adivasis as Vanvasis, as in colloquial terms, a narrative aggressively pushed by the RSS. He understood that many Adivasis had been gradually and often forcefully assimilated into Hindu society, leading to further marginalization and exploitation. His early warnings about rabbinical forces seeking to co-opt Adivasi identities remain alarmingly relevant today. So, it's a problematic, and there are so many in Ambedkar's life, when you read him minutely. So Adivasis also stays as one, but to construe that he was against Adivasis or even Muslims or any social group for that matter may not be really correct.
And Ambedkar once commented negatively on the increasing number of women parliamentarians that the Congress promoted. You write about how it is shocking to read this remark from a person considered a champion of women's emancipation and their right to education, who had once said, quote, "The progress of a community is measured by the degree of progress which women have achieved," end quote. He also expressed somewhat patriarchal views about Dalit women engaged in sex work, holding them responsible for the broader stigmatization of Dalit men. In a review of your book, Ashok Gopal critiques your take on this. He writes that, quote, "There is a world of difference between conservatism and misogyny," end quote. What are your reflections on this remark, and how do we reckon with this gulf between the revolutionary legacy of Ambedkar and the many contradictions like this?
This again is one of the problematics in Ambedkar. That one way, he's a very committed Democrat and who championed gender equality and was even willing to give a priority over other issues. But at other times, he actually repeats the same societal stereotypes and conservatism. Now, coming to Ashok Gopal's review, where he actually disputed the usage of word misogyny vis-a-vis conservatism. I could have used conservative. I agree with him. Probably, yeah, that might have been a proper word to use. So I do not have much of a dispute on that. But just to emphasize the contradictions, I chose to say, my sentence runs like this. One will be shocked to read such a misogynistic remark on women parliamentarians from a person considered a champion of women's emancipation. And on the other hand, while I would tend to agree that conservatism could have been an appropriate word, and misogyny is a very harsher word, but I still stand by the use of the word misogyny. If we consider feminist literature, and I have so many to name, but I would just point to one, is not out of place. The usage of misogyny in my context is not out of place. In her 2017 book, Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny, Kate Mann defines misogyny as a system that punishes women who do not conform to patriarchal roles. In light of Ambedkar's earlier remarks regarding sex workers, and he spoke in relation to women many times. So while he speaks about something like society's progress should be gauged by how its women are progressed. So at other times, he actually reflects very, very conservative and different kinds of views. He almost rejected these sex workers of Bombay, something like discarded them, that you have to give up your profession, etc., not taking cognizance of their compulsions. And same way, when he speaks about the women parliamentarian, he should have upheld he should have upheld their participation. The women are increasingly coming into legislatures. They should have been welcome, and it should have been a corollary of what he said positively about women, but he didn't. So just because to use a minor word for something like to be politically correct, I won't do that. You know. So misogyny reflects something like this kinds of cues, and I used it.
Dalits in India continue to suffer immense oppression under the force of the right wing Hindutva project. Even the practice of untouchability shows little decline over the years, as you've mentioned earlier. Today, the movement Ambedkar built is in crisis. You write that under the post 2014 BJP regime, some of the most prominent Dalit leaders of the Ambedkarite movement have jumped on the BJP's bandwagon in the face of a broader agenda of Hindu Rashtra that Ambedkar clearly warned against. At this juncture, in the face of the saffronizing of Ambedkar, how do we assess and take forward the legacy of Ambedkar and the movement towards the annihilation of caste that he led and fought for in India today?
And that has been the key question. The main objective behind writing this book also has been that. The challenge before us is that we find ourselves nowhere. There has been an onslaught on everything, and everything is getting sanctionized, autocratized, and fascized. As far as Dalit movement is concerned, most of the Dalit leaders are already in lap of RSS BJP. hardly anyone who actually stays abroad. I could just name a couple of them who appear to be navigating independently. Otherwise, everybody directly, indirectly have gone to BJP. And they have taken people also along because Dalit are very gullible people. They just follow their leaders blindly, and they have also gone over to that. And then BJP has huge resources, money resource is become a very, very vital. So their modus operandi is that Dalit Vastis, they literally help them in every kind of thing. It happened never before in Congress regime or anything. They have a network of people who actually monitor which family needs anything for what. So suppose there is something like date in the family, the people would reach them and see give some money, to do the rituals. So this way people get obligated and start seeing them that what has been the difference between Congress or BJP for that matter. There is hardly any big difference. So the people who actually give you and support with money, probably why not support them? So this is the logical answer they might be getting in their minds, and people that way have been swayed in favor of BJP. Having said that, now how do we break this deadlock? Is the biggest question. And entire thing, appears to rotate around Ambedkar. Alongside, they have been successful in sacrificing Ambedkar. The way they projected Ambedkar as a congenial figure for them, themselves, So that has also been having impact on Dalit minds. So they said that Ambedkar has done something. For them, if Ambedkar has done anything, that is a sacrosanct. So this mold needs to be broken. And that is what was a challenge before me. There is no easier way than projecting Ambedkar in his real persona as a man who walked this earth in a flesh and blood, and project him something like that kind of a live person who struggled with a singular aim in his mind. His greatness lies in that, not in the things that he did. They were done in a context. So it could have been wrong, it could have been right, it could have been okay. So that needed to be assessed with hindsight. We have a advantage of hindsight. So in his place, probably we would have done more blunders. So that is not a issue. But issue is that it is my life which is ahead of me, my children's life which is ahead of them. So how do we see them? How do we lend ourselves to be manipulated by the ruling classes in his name, or see what exactly has happened in the history? The way they have been projecting Ambedkar has been something wrong. So these kind of insights needed to be gained by Dalits. Otherwise, there is no escape. Ambedkar, I refer probably to Ranade Gandhi and Jinnah, his speech he delivered in Pune. There he incidentally brings out all these dimensions, and that probably works as a lesson. And even in my justification of myself, I said in some interview that okay, I followed Ambedkar only. So this is what he said, and that has precisely been done by me. So this is the way people ought to. It contains a big lesson, and I have not come across any explicit terms such a valid lesson being given by any great man. That great man is nothing but somebody offering his shoulders for the next generation to stand on and look at farther. So the coming generation, they have a intrinsic benefit to see further than me. Okay, so that is the very, very profound kind of imagery, and this is the way people should take him. Ambedkar did contribute to the upliftment of Dalit in some ways, but how much, what has happened, how to take it, all those kinds of things remain as a question mark for us. and they needed to be resolved. Ultimately, the so-called followers of Ambedkar have to do is that, oh yes, say thank you for lending your shoulder to me, for standing on and seeing it further. That's it. And Ambedkar said that no great man should expect more than that. That's what it is. This is the only way to resolve even the question of annihilation of caste, because we find nowhere otherwise. That goal itself is lost.
Dr. Teltumbde, thank you so much for the insightful and generous conversation and for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Southasia Review of Books podcast from Himal Southasian. This episode was edited by Ritika Chauhan. If you like this episode, please share widely, rate, review, subscribe, and download the show on your favorite podcast apps. You can find the links to subscribe and listen to previous episodes on our website at himalmag.com. And while you're at it, please do also check out Himal's State of South Asia podcast, hosted by Nayantara Narayanan, featuring conversations on pressing social and political issues from across South Asia. What we do and what we love doing at Himal is really looking at South Asian literature like no other, and that gives us a very unique community viewpoint and the privilege of making conversations like this possible. So if you'd like to help us out, please do become a paying Himal patron. We have a great program with lots of perks, including Himal's iconic right side up map, and we'll welcome you to a fantastic South Asia Review of Books community. Thank you again, and until next time.